Hello everyone, MadDogOzie here with another review from the DM's Guild. Peering with my third eye, I have seen Psionics, a supplement for 5e by Bardic Inspired DM, currently on sale for $9.99. Let's go check this one out. So, Psionics. This is a 25-page supplement for 5th edition that includes a psionic class, psionic feats, psionic spells, psionic magical items, subclasses for that class, some race variants, some kind of background around a psionic like empire, kind of like a primer for like an adventure module you could run, and some monsters and vehicles you can include as well. So what's the best way of including psionics in a game that you already have? Probably starting with something like monsters and vehicles. So at the back of the book, page 18 to 25, that's where you get all of this information. You get some new monsters, some new creatures, some new vehicles in order to include them that are powered by psionic energies, those kinds of things. Now, to give a background on psionics in general, psionics is the power of your mind, the strength of your third eye. This one here, it wiggles about and everything. And that's how you know it's a real eye. The whole point of psionics is to break away from the normality of the Venetian magic system within D&D 5th edition and all D&D in general. And it has had a tumultuous past, to say the least. Even in 5th edition, if you just look at that, you're talking about things like the Mystic class, which was universally panned in terms of its power scaling and the way it worked. I had a Mystic in one of my games, and I found it both very, very powerful in early games and underwhelming in later areas. It tended to be very complicated in order to figure out what exactly the Mystic was attempting to do. It also was very complex for me to work out what the Mystic was capable of at any individual time, because the UA for it wasn't written in the same way, in the same style that a lot of other things are for those kinds of reasons. So, and even before that, even if you look back in earlier editions of D&D, psionics in general have had a tumultuous past. They have been a very Marmite style kind of character, or its character class. There is a love it or hate it kind of mentality here, and I think that's pervasive over to 5th edition. Now, that is to give you some background, so let's look at this version of the Psion class. Let's start with the class, the Psion class. It is basically a class that is done around the idea of using psionics to power all of their abilities. And it is a D6 HP class with these proficiencies in light armor, simple weapons, psionic weapons, no tools. You gain intelligence and wisdom saving throw proficiencies, which kind of makes sense. So one of the big ones and one of the more less useful ones that doesn't come up very often. You also get 2 skills, deception, history, insight, intelligence, perception, or persuasion. And you get a number of starting equipment that is not that important. But the main bit is, at first level, you gain the ability to perform spell-like abilities through psionic points. Intelligence is your spellcasting ability fire. Your abilities only require the somatic components. They do not require any focus or verbal component. They basically just remove those altogether. Your spell-like abilities are treated as spells, though, when interacting with things like counterspell and with things like dispel magic and those kinds of things, because it makes it easier for a DM to kind of manage, and it makes it fit better into the existing systems, and that way you're not trying to figure out, well, that's a psionic ability, if that's a psionic spell, not a regular spell, it will behave differently, so counterspell doesn't work on it, and that feels really strange, because you're trying to write eight different, like 2 different rule sets for 2 different styles of magic that diverge completely, and nothing else does that. Now, D&D 5th edition is a game of exceptions, but you don't want to create a massive one like that, because the spells that the psionics use are still some of the spells that you get as part of the normal 5th edition SRD, and so you don't want to say, well, that version of Magic Missile can't be counterspelled, but this version of Magic Missile can be, and that feels really wonky. So next is you get a number of psionic points equal to your level plus your intelligence modifier. Each ability costs 1 psionic point per spell level used. So first level spell costs 1 psionic point. Now this is kind of similar to what's already in the DMG. If you look at the very back end of the DMG, it gives you a kind of guide on how to run things with spell points rather than with spell levels. This can help, if you're ever thinking about using it, this can help with some people who have this thing where I cast a first level spell. Does that mean you're a first level wizard? No, it means I cast a first level spell. If I cast a fifth level spell, does that mean I'm a fifth level wizard? No, it means you're a 13th level wizard. Spell points is like it's very similar to that system if you want to think. You also gain the Mage Hand cantrip. Your Mage Hand is invisible and does not require components. So similar to the Arcane Trickster's ability, a Mage Hand Legermain or something along those lines. I can never remember what that is. You also learn the Message Cantrip when you cast it without any components in your message. Is immediately telepathic, so you basically gain telepathy. Now you also gain a couple of cantrips you can take. You take Psy Blast, which is a new one, Shillelagh, and Vicious Mockery. So kind of makes sense. You're in the right area. You're psionically powering up things, or you're psionically like making people doubt themselves. Those kinds of things. So the spells fit really nicely. You can cast your following spells with psionic points. You gain Command, Jump, and Shield. You can also cast Unseen Servant as a ritual spell. We'll come on to that because I have an issue with that. You also gain the ability to wrap yourself in psionic armor. While you're conscious and not incapacitated, you can substitute your intelligence modifier for your dexterity modifier when calculating arcans. Basically just like switching the two stats out from each other, not in addition to like you would in things like a barbarian or a monk where you get wisdom or constitution. At second level, you gain your psionic specialization. You pick a specific one. So you go, okay, well, I want to be either an enhancer, influencer, or a manipulator. Now, this gives you room to expand beyond that to get more, it allows you to increase different, it gives you the ability and capacity to say, well, I want to include, I want to be very specific down, like, for instance, if you are the Enhancer, you gain the ability to learn the Spare the Dying cantrip. You also learn these spells, Bless, Longstrider, and Zephyr Strike. So you get a lot of, like, helpful things that increase the party's or yours overall effectiveness. If you want to be the Influencer, this is kind of where you then get things like Friends, Charm Person, or Bane, and Dissonant Whispers. And then Manipulator, you get the spells Prestidigitation, Featherfall, Force Push, and Magic Missile. So kind of you manipulate psionic energy directly, so you're more like kind of the conjuration or evoker wizard kind of style. You want to do damage. Now each of these different specializations comes with a unique perk that increases their effectiveness in battle or increases their effectiveness outside of it. So for instance, in the Enhancer's case, you have the ability to psionically accelerate a creature's natural healing. So as a bonus, bonus action, you can expend one psionic point to touch a creature within 5 feet. They expend and roll one unused hit die, healing for the amount rolled plus your intelligence modifier. So it's not their constitution modifier, it's your intelligence, which can be better or worse depending on what their stats are like. But it's still really useful, and I think it's really interesting, and it also has a good cost for benefit kind of thing. At third level, you gain improved psionics, so your enhancer abilities get better. You also gain new spells, but in the way this works is you gain all of the spells and you always know them, but they are very set and specific depending on what subclass you've chosen. Also at third level, you gain Limit Break, which allows you to push past your psionic limits in order to continue to use your psionic abilities at a cost. As an action, you can expend one of your unused hit dice in order to gain psionic points equal to your intelligence modifier plus the number you rolled, and you gain 1 level of exhaustion. So very high cost kind of thing, because exhaustion looks on paper like it won't do much, but if you've ever spoken to a Raid the Reckless Barbarian one, that variant, and I've been watching a lot of Court of Swords recently, being at 2 or 3 levels of exhaustion gets real dicey real quick. Next, at 4th level, you get inability or recruitment, and then advanced psionic specialization at 5th level. So your enhancer or your influencer or your manipulators get better. They get stronger, and they get a little better. And then you move on to things like psionic meditation at 6th level, which gains you the ability to you can choose to meditate during a long rest rather than taking a normal sleeping, and you stay kind of aware of your surroundings. While meditating for at least 10 minutes, you gain blind sight and true tremor sense out to 60 feet and cannot be surprised. So really useful if you're doing one of those watches where you can't sleep, but you need to kind of maintain those things. You can add your intelligence modifier to your perception rolls during this period, and the effects main until you move, basically. So you stay in that state for as long as you want. Once per long rest, when you complete a short rest via meditation, you can use your limit break ability once without consuming a hit die or gaining a level of exhaustion. The ability can also be used once per long rest, so it kind of powers up an existing ability. It's really useful. Psionic Specialist. At the 7th level, you've improved your psionic skills. You can now cast your first and through 3rd level spells at 4th level by using 4 psionic points. So basically, you get stronger and stronger and higher level spells. And that kind of continues on throughout the entire class. And you also gain new spells, depending on which one of the specializations you've chosen. And then at 9th level, you gain Mastered Psionic Specialization. You master your pinnacle abilities, chosen Psionic Specialization. You can now cast 1st through 5th level spells by using 5 psionic points. You gain some new spells, and again, same things forward. You get. I'm not going to a whole lot of detail here because there are things that I will pick out later to say here are things I liked, here are things I didn't like, but you get the idea. You get stronger and stronger. The interesting ones are as you get higher and higher and stronger levels, you get more and more spells, as you would expect. And at 20th level, because I always like to talk about the capstone, you're able to use your psionic energy to accomplish your goals. All spells that cost 2 or more psionic points cost 1 point less. So on all 1st level spells can be cast at 2nd level if you spend 1 psionic point. So basically, you can just cast 1st level spells for free, essentially, and you can cast 1st level spells as 2nd level spells, basically for 1st level spells. You each also get things like your Enhancer, Manipulator, and Infinite abilities get very, very strong. They do a lot of extra things, and they're really interesting, but they kind of follow that theme of this is what this class does, this is what this one does, these do this, and this does this. Cool. If you want to multi-class into this, you need to have intelligence of at least 13, but you do gain the proficiency in the psionic weapons, and you cannot use psionic points to cast spells learned between the other classes. So that's kind of a good thing. It keeps people from doing really stupid things like coffee locks and bullshit like that, or the Paladin Warlock combo, which is also a little strong. And then moving on from the class, you get new spells, things like Force Push, Force Wave. I want to talk about my favorite one in here, though. I really like Psy Blast. Psy Blast is kind of like a nice little cantrip that's really useful and really interesting. So you make a burst of concentrated force energy, strikes at a creature within range, makes a ranged spell attack against a target. On a hit, roll 2d8. Now, oh my gosh, that's 2d8. That's stronger than every other cantrip in the game. Nothing does that except, nothing does that much damage. Hold on. The target takes the higher of the 2 rolls as force damage. If you score a critical hit, you roll with this spell, you roll 4d8 and take the 2 highest. This is a really interesting spell, and I've never seen one like this. I really like this for that reason, for the uniqueness of it, for the amount of dice you're rolling. I imagine if you were trying to implement this class in Roll20, it would cause havoc, because rolling 2d8 and trying to figure out which one's which, it doesn't actually work that way. Roll20 is a bit stupid sometimes for that kind of stuff. So like weird things that are outside the normal. But I love outside the normal. I really like that. It kind of gives you a good idea around this. You also have spells like Redirect, which allows you to, when a creature targets another creature with an attack or a spell which requires an attack roll, you create a small rift at the point of contact, choose another creature within 30 feet. A second rift appears beside them and they become the target of the attack instead. You may cast a spell you may cast the spell after knowing the result of the roll. So basically, if somebody is going to attack somebody with a crit, you could redirect it to somebody else, cost your reaction, and it is a 4th level spell. So quite useful, quite powerful, but I like it from that perspective. So next we have the psionic feats. We have things like Monarch Defense, Precognition, Psionic Initiate. So things that allow you to do some of the psionic abilities depending on whether or not you meet the prerequisites. So some of the things like prerequisites. So there's a Monastic Defense, which is a prerequisite you must be a Githzerai. Or Psyblade, and you must be Gambi, basically. That kind of adds in those racial features that you had in Xanathar's Guide to Everything for the Githzerai. So the Githzerai and the Githyanki, because the Psyblade is from the Githyanki. And then there's things like that increase psionic power. So Psionicist increases your study says advantage 3. You have gained the following. You can speak telepathy to any creature. You learn the following new spells. You also learn the following second level spells. So you can get a lot of things out of that as a result of that. You also can actually just take Psionic Initiate, which is actually acts a lot like Magic Initiate, except they are psionic spells for you for this specific thing, which is really interesting and I think a good actual feat in general. Next, we move on to Psionic magical items. So I want to talk about specific. Yeah, are they Psionic magical items if they're Psionic? I guess they are. Anyways, so Psionic magical items. I want to talk about the one of my favorite ones here, the Shackles of Suppression, which is a really interesting magical item in general, and I like these kinds of ideas. When a Psion or spellcaster is placed into these shackles, they are restrained and unable to cast any spells or spell-like abilities. So it's an interesting idea that I think that we don't see much in D&D 5e, because there, presumably within all societies, there must be ways of dealing with magic users. Now, you could put down an anti-magical field, but that just means that if they're a magic user and a rogue or some kind of other mundane thing, you've got another problem on your hand, is now they can get out of it because you can't put things like magical arcane locks in place. This Shackles of Suppression kind of solves that problem for you nicely, and it also has another side benefit. You can find out who the magical spellcasters are, because you can use these on them and they go click and nothing happens. It's like, you're not a caster, you don't have any spells, but I can put these on everyone else to figure out which one of you is. Because that's the thing that I think a lot of D&D dungeon masters miss, is that knowing what class somebody is incredibly important and valuable information. So when the enemies are fighting your player characters and things like that, there's not necessarily going to know that, hey, that guy's a cleric, or hey, that guy's the wizard, I can probably take him out. You can use a lot of tricks to figure out who's what, depending on what armor they're wearing. It's like, okay, the guy in heavy armor, he probably can't cast spells. But they've tricked me, and then somehow he can cast spells, and the monsters know what they're doing. There's a book that just came out recently, which is precisely that. They do know what they're doing. They don't attack the guy with the heavy armor. They go after the guy in the cloth robes. But figuring that stuff out can be really hard depending on what class is. A Hexblade Warlock, for instance, can wear medium armor, and it can get very difficult to figure out who the casters are, especially if they're just using their blade and they're just cutting people, mowing people down with the sword, and then all of a sudden they do like a 5th level spell. It's like, that guy was a caster, but we didn't know it until now, and we should have been dealing with him because he probably doesn't have that much HP. So that's an interesting idea, and I like that magical item for that. But there's a whole host of, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 new psionic magic items, which is really useful and good and they kind of like either boost psionic abilities or augment them or have some effect on psionic abilities. So next you have the psionic subclasses: Psionic Warrior for the fighters, Way of the Mind for the monk, and Wizard School of Psionics. So Wizard School of Psionics is as you would expect. It utilizes a lot of the psionic spells that you already have in the book and gives you access to them, because it expands your spell list, because it allows you access to those new ones, and it gives you some psionic abilities, some psionic points, and allows you to do things that ordinary wizards are not able to do, because you can, as psionic spells, you can cast them without verbal or material components. You don't need those things that will give you away, because somatic components are quiet. That's one of the things about psionics that is really, really useful. You also get the new variant races, the Githyanki and the Githzerai, the psionic variant versions of them, so they gain some psionic spells, and they gain some new abilities that are kind of interesting. Finally, you go into the Yang, the Psionic Empire, which is a really interesting idea, and I think I really like this from a perspective of including it in a supplement like this, because if you're going to include psionics, a lot of DMs will go, well, how do I figure out how these how do I introduce psionics into my campaign without breaking it or causing some problems? And this kind of allows you to do that. It allows you to go, okay, well, I've given you a primer for this society that exists with psionics. That's how they work, and this is how they do. And this is the kinds of things that they have, the architecture of the vehicles, the weapons, and how their technology is, and their cultures, and their government. It gives you a good primer to get started, something to spring off of, and I really like it from that perspective. Next, you have a set of adventures in Guyane. They're very short, they're about a paragraph each, but they're just a primer to get you started. So things like chapter 3, levels 10 to 16. You discover that the Baroness is a servant of some sort of strange entity of insanity, shackled by the gods long ago. She, along with a new cast of villains, are attempting to gather the pieces of a cosmic key that will release their patron from its bonds. To prey on the minds of all sentient beings. You must now attempt to find the keys of this cosmic key, which reside in the 4 elemental planes. A really interesting kind of like good style adventure, but short and sweet, so you can build off of those things, which is a really great thing for a dungeon master to have. Finally, you move on to psionic monsters and vehicles. So things like the Githyanki Zealots, the Templars, the High Templars. So it's like a lot of Githyanki, a lot of Githzerai, and then some psions, so basic, just really quick, here I want to introduce some psionics. Let's introduce some psionic monsters so that players will understand that this magic is different, that it behaves differently, so that they can figure out how this works, and they can start going, hey, if they're psionic and they're doing this, maybe there's a teacher out there that can teach me how to be psionic, because I want a multi-class, because I'm a smart character, I'm a wizard or something, and I could do that. Next, you move on to things like psionic vehicles, so things like chariots, airboats, but they're powered by psionics. So basically, you link yourself to these vehicles so that you can move quicker, or you can move faster, or you can fly, or things like that. So, or move between planes in the case of the Astral Trekker. And that's everything that's in this book. Now let's go on to things I liked about this book. So I like psionics. I have given them more chances than I think any other DM has a right to. And I've played with Mystics, and I've played with the new Psionics classes. I played with the new Psionics spells. I played with old editions of Psionics. I really like them. This version of Psionics, I think, is a good first step. I've seen what Mike Merles has done recently. I think it was a couple of months ago, maybe something like that. And I liked where that was going as well. This seems to be following the same path. It is not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It is not trying to create a whole brand new system like Mystic was. It is trying to say, look, I understand that magic is a thing. I need to interact with that world because that's how power is. And it goes, I like the way that works. I like Psyblast. I like the way that works. I like interesting, unique mechanical spells, and players like rolling more dice. Psyblast is a great little cantrip. It probably freaks people out when they see it first time because they go, holy crap, that has 2d8 damage. It's like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't have 2d8 damage. It has 1d8 damage most of the time. I imagine if you were to do the math out, the average damage would be slightly higher than normal because of the nature of the way the spell works, as I explained earlier. But I kind of like that. I kind of like that it's in that weird spot because the fact of the matter is you have spells that do 1d12, or you have the Eldritch Blast, which is doing 1d10, and holy crap, Warlock is strong with that spell. I really like the included primer to a setting. That is a stroke of genius, because including things like scions and saying, here you go, here's a psionic class, anyone could have done that. There are probably 24 of those psionic classes on the DM's Guild. And I know because I've been sent like 5 of them. And I think including just a psionic class isn't enough. It isn't enough for a DM's Guild purchase, because if a player wants to play psionics and you're playing as a dungeon master, it's like, well, how does psionics interact with my world, or how does psionics interact with the Forgotten Realms, or if you're in things like Eberron or any of those situations, like, well, how does psionics interact, and where is their society, and what do they look like, and where's the rest of them? It's like, because everyone has a really good understanding of what a wizard is and how a sorcerer works and a warlock and those things. It's like their magic is mostly, for the common populace, is innocuous. It's the same no matter which one they look at. It's like when somebody sees a warlock, sorcerer, or wizard, it's like they're a magic user who casts spells. I don't care how they do it. As a commoner, not as a player, it's different as a player. As a commoner, they're throwing magic. Magic user, mage, wizard, sorcerer. The names may as well be synonyms for the commoners. But a psionic is different. A psionic definitely behaves differently, acts differently, does things differently. The magic feels different. And so you need kind of a way of differentiating them. You need a way of saying these people are very different. I also really like the specializations. I like the way that spells were given out to the various psionic specializations, because it feels different from any other spellcasters. It's not a case of you get to pick and choose. It's, here are the choices. You've made a choice to be the manipulator or the influencer or the enhancer. Here's your spell list. You're done. You don't make many choices beyond those three points. And obviously ASIs, which fits really nicely within the existing framework, beyond some other quibbles that I'll come on to later. I like the inclusion of the new psionic feats. I like the idea of psionic initiative. That was a really good idea, because it allows people to dip their toe into the psionic spells and things, and dip their pinky toe and go, nope, not for me, kind of thing. And I also really like the psionic magical items, which are psionic weapons or psionic things. So you have things like the psionic greatsword. So when in the hands of a normal person, it's basically useless, but in the hands of somebody who has psionic, something you could do around the idea of you create a psionically gifted child, for instance, and they pick up this weapon that is normally useless, and all of a sudden it's doing much more powerful than it was. Like really cool, like plot hooks you could pull in with some of the psionic magics. I like the idea of the psionic subclasses, again with the same idea of dipping your toe in. It kind of says, well, you're still a fighter or a monk or a wizard, but you have these kind of psionic flavor to these abilities, and you can do some things that are a little interesting. So, for instance, the monk way of the mind, I really like the idea that you gain mage hand, because monks don't generally normally get mage hand, but it kind of gives you a good idea of how it works. And I think the way around things like Psionics and the Mage Hand cantrip is a really good idea, is because it gives them telekinesis without creating a new spell that you didn't need, which is a really great thing to do. Right, so now on to things I didn't like. So I'm going to talk about these in no particular order, but I'm just going to kind of rattle through them as quick as I can. I kind of have like a rambly style at the moment. So psionic armor, I think maybe a slightly bit too strong. I think changing out your dexterity mod for your intelligence modifier allows you to do some interesting things. I think it will have some negatives to it. I'd have to work the math out, but I'm not 100% sure on this. It's one of those things where you'd have to try and play and figure out whether or not good things. Speaking of the psionic specializations, one thing I would have really liked to have seen somewhere maybe further on, and I think there's a lot of room for this in general D&D supplements. This isn't necessarily criticism of this one, because it's something that happens in every single D&D class. You get one choice in this class in the entire thing, ignoring the ASIs, because I don't really count those. They're not really choices. You make minor changes. Most fighters all look the same at a certain level. All Battlemaster fighters look the same. This carries that same problem, but I think it doesn't have to. I think this class has a unique feature into it that it would allow it to be very different. You have Enhancer, Influencer, and Manipulator. It would have been nice to have at every level to make a choice of which one you're going to get stronger. So such that you could have a psionic that has 3 levels in Enhancer and 2 levels in Influencer and maybe a level in Manipulator. Now, how you would work that out and how they would do that, so basically you could have full Enhancer, which would be like you gain all the spells at that level, or you were full Enhancer, you were 3 Enhancer and 2 Influencer, so you gain 3 levels of Enhancers, you gain 3 of those things, and you gain 2 of the Influencer. Now, the problem with doing this style of things is because there's 2 reasons. Balancing becomes more tricky because you're trying to figure out how these abilities interact with each other as well as with all of the other things you could potentially do. So like some combination of Enhancer, Influencer, Manipulator causes the game to break down into non-existence. And obviously because you're doing that, you're not gaining higher and higher level spells. You're basically cross-classing within your own class, which is an interesting concept that I think D&D doesn't play around with too much. But I would have liked to see more choice in the class itself. I think it's a design area that D&D lacks in. Choice at level up is basically non-existence. You make 2 or 3 choices in your entire leveling. So from 1 to 20, you make 1 or 2 choices usually, depending on your class. The caster classes are different because when they gain levels, they gain choices in what spells to take, and there are enough spells out there to give interesting and unique flavors to each class. This feels like it could have done the same thing, but it's kind of shied away from that, unfortunately, from one reason or another. I would have liked to see a lot more art in the book in general. It's very Spartan. It's very very word wally. There isn't a lot of breakup in terms of putting some art in there, especially in things like the magical items. I would have liked to see things like when you have the Scion class, you would want to see what a psionic Scion looks like. It would have been nice to have things like what does the mystic look, what is just some extra art to break up the word wall, so that it's more pleasing on the eyes and easier to read. I know it's still only 25 pages long, but it would have been nice to have that breakup. One of the other things that I would have loved to see that I think every single class needs is that nice little class table right at the front to say, like, here, if you just quick glance at it, what do I get at X level? And as I look down the list, I can see where my efficiency bonus increases, where my how many psionic points I have for this level based on everything I've got. And so, like, you can just see this is 1 plus bliss, 2 plus intelligence, and so on and so forth. It's really nice to see that table and really useful to have it, and that's something that I think this is lacking. All classes should have that table. It is incredibly helpful. And speaking of tables in general, the subclasses are also lacking their tables as well. But we usually don't use them for subclasses, but that's not a problem. So, the final thing I wanted to mention is that there is a mention in the book about casting spells as a ritual. Ritual spells, I don't think anyone really understands. This seems to be the biggest point of contention is how this works. Ritual spells, ritual casting is a class feature. It is not something you automatically get. You can't automatically cast ritual spells. Not every class can cast them. For instance, paladins gain access to some ritual spells, but they can't cast ritually. But if they gain, for instance, the ritual caster feat, they can then do so. So this is something that I think needs to be addressed specifically. So there is a component in here that says something like cast the spells to ritual. What I think the author has intended is that you can cast this without consuming psionic points, but it takes a significant amount of time investment. So 10 minutes is the usual average, depending on what spell you're casting. But it is useful to say that you either give them the ritual caster feat or the ritual caster ability, or you decide to not give them the ritual caster ability and you instead say that that particular feature is not a ritual thing. You just cast it at 10 minutes and you give a specific exclusion for it if you're only going to include it once. Right, so what did I think overall? This is kind of my final thoughts and my rating. I really like this as an attempt. It's much better than the Mystic by leaps and bounds. It's more in line with the existing D&D stuff. It's more in line by spells things with the existing D&D stuff. It makes it simple to figure out what's going on, simple to figure out for a DM to figure out what is this psionic class capable of, and the inclusion of things like the primer and the setting and some of the quests markers and also the new monsters and all the new spells and new magical items allows you to include this psionic class within your existing framework without it having to be too onerous on you. Now, do I think it's perfect? No, I do not think it's perfect. I think no Scion class straight out of the gate without numerous revisions would be perfect. In fact, I even saw an exchange on Twitter with the author and somebody else talking about one of the spells they were looking at, and they made some changes, which is a good sign. I like to see authors come back to things and fix things that they know are potentially broken or potentially problematic, or they can make them better. I like that because DM's Guild is a digital platform, you can always improve the product very easily. You're not having to rely on things like, let's print a new copy of the player's handbook. Right. Okay, that's $50. Okay. Saying that, however, I think it does have some issues. I think things like the ritual spell not understanding, I think Things like Psionic Defense might be a smidgen too strong. I'm not sure on that one. I think things like adding more art to the book will help it a lot in terms of readability, and I do think adding that table in is a big like loss for the whole overall look. I think having that class table makes it very, very easy to understand what this class does at any particular level. I also think at the design space for making more choices as you level up is a really, really good one. It was one of the good things about Mystic is it allowed players who got bored of their classes. And I know there's a couple of players out there. I've had two of them in this. One of them played the Mystic, and one of them is currently looking at trying to kill their own character off. They're fairly reckless, though, so they probably will succeed at some point. But I think that's a thing that a lot of players struggle with, is that I've made a choice, I've made a class, fighters are notorious for this, and now I'm bored of it, and we're level 11, and I don't really want to stop playing because I really enjoy the role player, I really enjoy the characters, I really enjoy playing with it, but I'm bored of the characters' abilities. And I think having something in the D&D design space where you were making more choices at level up so that you had a feeling that you were changing things as you were going and kind of readjusting your bit feels better. And I think this class would have been a really good carrier for that, a really good transport for that. Right, so my rating, I'm going to give it 3.5 stars out of 5. And on the DM's Guild, I'm going to go to 4. Now, the reason I'm giving it 3.5 stars is because it's lack of table, lack of art, general feel of the book isn't up to the point where I would go, this is a 4 or this is a 5. Add that art in, add that table in, maybe do some more revisions around tweaking spells and abilities and things like that. Or really wow me and go back and look at Enhancer, Influencer, and Manipulator and go, you know what, he's right. Let's add some choices at different levels, because the moment is the only spellcaster that has a single choice in level up, a single one, which I think is a big shame for a class that's a spellcaster. A part of the whole thing with spellcasters is you get to make a lot of choices as you level up. And I think this lacks that completely, which is one of the biggest problems with the 5th edition, is that there's a great lack of choice at level up. So that is my final rating, 3.5 stars out of 5. I think you should still check out this if you're looking for a psionic class, if you're looking for something, a primer. The primer is really, really good. It is $9.99, and I hope I see more improvements as it goes along. This is the very first outing for this author, so hopefully we see more from him. Or her, I don't actually know, or they, I don't know. Actually, I don't think they have their pronouns on their Twitter handle. I could check, though. I should check that. I'm going to go check that really quickly. Bardic Inspired DM. Let me see. Name. They do not have their pronouns on their thing. So I will go with they, because that's a fairly innocuous one. Anyways, hopefully I see more from them in the future. I expect they will improve with time. I have seen more DM's Guild creators than I care to comment on go from, I think I gave Ashley Warren a 3 once. Yeah. I think I gave her a 3. But now she's one of the best authors on the guild, I would say. So everyone gets better. No one starts at 100. I think this is a really good piece of advice. I think I try to get advice on DM's Guild authors. Anyways, I'm rambling. Thank you for stopping by. Thank you for coming. Thank you for viewing. Thank you for subscribing. Please don't forget to comment and subscribe. It helps my channel out. And don't forget to use the affiliate code, which will be down below in the description, for Psionics, a 5th edition D&D supplement. Thank you. Peace.